Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey into the Disturbing Manga Iceberg, and man, it's already getting really dark. Thanks for all the support for the last video, I'm glad you guys are enjoying this iceberg. But let's just keep it moving into tiers 3 and 4. This is the Disturbing Manga Iceberg, part 2. Tier 3. Let's start things off right with Frank and Fran. Basically, a mad scientist creates all sorts of abominations using dead bodies. His masterpiece, however, is Fran, a Frankenstein-like creation. The series follows Fran, who has taken over the Mad Doctor's house while he's away. Every chapter usually consists of Fran taking on some job concerning bringing a person back to life or altering someone's body in some way. You can see where the series becomes disturbing, as we usually see these surgeries in gruesome detail, and the results are almost always unpleasant. Despite the series featuring heavy gore and morbid themes, Fran is very lighthearted, and this sets the upbeat tone of the manga. It's a great contrast, and the series keeps you wondering, how's Fran going to solve the issue in this chapter, and is she ultimately going to make the people's lives worse along the way? Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Fran almost always messes up the operations in some way or alters people in unhelpful ways. For instance, in the first chapter, a man asks Fran to bring his dead son back from the dead. Secretly, he actually was the one who killed his son. Fran brings the son back to life as requested, however, she attaches him to the back of the father's head, making them share a body. The manga finds a great balance between body horror and morbid humor. Mirako-chan. This one is just awesome. It follows a high school student, Miko, through her day-to-day life. The only thing is, Miko begins to see things. Really creepy things. Essentially, she starts seeing spirits in a similar fashion to the kid in Sixth Sense. What's great about this manga is that the drawing style on the dead is so uniquely disturbing, and at the same time there's a lot of humor, especially in moments when Miko pretends she isn't seeing the spirits and tries to act normal. It's a great blend of horror and comedy. Eventually, Mirako starts embracing her powers more. There's a great moment when Miko and her friend are trying to find someone to adopt a stray cat, and when a nice charming man arrives to adopt it, Miko can see he's surrounded by the anguished souls of dead cats that he presumably killed. The next person to show up looks much rougher and less sociable than the first man, but is surrounded by the angels of cats who seem to love him. Miko gives him the cat and realizes you can't always judge a book by its cover. I recommend checking this one out, it really made me laugh. MDP Psycho. MDP Psycho follows Yosuke, a detective with multiple personality disorder, as he investigates gruesome crimes committed by serial killers in Tokyo. Yosuke has 6 distinct personalities that emerge at different times, and each personality has its own unique abilities and weaknesses. Despite his condition, he's a talented detective and is assigned to investigate a series of murders that involve the dismemberment of victims' bodies and the display of their body parts in public areas. It's a pretty interesting idea, and there's definitely some Hannibal vibes in the way the victims' bodies are found mutilated in strange ritualistic ways. Hakaiju. Hakaiju is pretty straightforward. A bunch of grotesque creatures show up and just start wrecking shit. There's a little bit of drama between the characters, but seriously, it's mostly just high school kids getting mutilated by creatures in graphic detail. Shiki. Shiki's a horror mystery manga that takes place in a small rural village named Sotoba, which is plagued by a mysterious epidemic of deaths that are occurring one after the other. As the deaths increase, a young doctor named Toshio Ozaki begins to investigate the cause of the deaths. As Toshio's investigation continues, he discovers that the epidemic of deaths is not caused by an ordinary disease, but rather by a group of vampires who have infiltrated the village. The story follows Toshio and a group of other villagers as they struggle to survive and defeat the vampires before they destroy the entire village. This manga is actually based off of a Japanese novel and is well regarded in the horror mystery genre. Mahou Shoujo Site. In the last video we covered Mahou Shoujo The End, aka Magical Girl Apocalypse. Well, Mahou Shoujo Site, or Magical Girl Site, is by the same author and takes place in the same universe sometime before the apocalypse. The story follows Aya, who's bullied at school and by her own older brother at home. One day a website appears on her computer screen and a really disturbing image of a girl begins speaking to her, telling her that she will grant her magic powers and send her a magic stick. Aya's magic stick looks kind of like a Nerf revolver and holds the ability to teleport whoever she shoots, usually into death. For example, a group of bullies are harassing her in an alleyway, and when she shoots them with her magic stick, they're teleported onto nearby train tracks where they're torn to pieces by the train. Pretty brutal. From there, Aya learns that there are many others who have acquired sticks through the site, including a girl who can freeze time, and another who collects magic sticks by killing the owners. You can see where this escalates into a complex horror show. Like Magical Girl Apocalypse, this manga's chock full of brutal kills and disturbing moments, including the scene where a man shoots blood out of his ass. Sorry, but if I had to see it, so do you. Jogon. This one is Well, there's no other way to say it. This shit is straight up bonkers. Jagan follows a police officer named Jagasaki who is fed up with his boring life and the lack of respect he gets. He often fantasizes of shooting up the people who give him a hard time with his gun. One day while on the train, a businessman suddenly transforms into a hideous beast using his massive tongue to cut people to pieces. Right before Jagasaki is also killed, his arm transforms into a gun-like monstrosity that blows the monster to bits. So, let me try to explain what's going on here. One day, hundreds of frogs begin pouring from the sky across the city. These frogs burrow into the bodies of individuals, transforming them into monsters that reflect their deep desires. These deformed humans are called fractured humans. Jagasaki is also a fractured human. His desire to shoot people has transformed his arm into a gun. Jagasaki has a talking owl as a sidekick that eats the frogs and poops out a dung ball. If he snorts these dung balls up his nose, he can stop himself from being completely transformed into a monster, so the objective is to kill all the fractured humans and collect the dung balls from the owl so that he can survive. The problem is there are other half-fractured humans like Jagasaki who are employing the same tactics but with their own set of skills. I didn't make any of that up. That's actually the plot of this manga. It's insane. Pumpkin Night. Pumpkin Night follows yet another bullied high school girl who is seeking revenge against a group of bullies. She seeks out a girl who is rumored to have the power to make any wish come true. So she wishes for the power to kill her bullies, and the girl grants her wish by giving her a pumpkin mask that imbues her with incredible strength and agility. She then embarks on a brutal and bloody rampage against her former tormentors, stalking and killing them one by one with a variety of gruesome and inventive methods. I really like the imagery of the pumpkin head in this. It just gives off an 80s slasher movie vibe to me, and that's a plus. Sajiki Onna. Sajiki Onna follows the life of Hiroshi, a young man who moves into a new apartment to start a new life. However, he soon realizes that a strange woman in his apartment seems to be stalking him. Although this isn't as violent or gory as a lot of the entries on this list, the woman is really eerie and just gives me the creeps. Dissolving Classroom. This is another one by Junji Ito. Dissolving Classroom is pretty weird. It follows two siblings, a high school aged boy and his young sister. The manga is structured as a series of interconnected short stories, each focusing on a different victim of the siblings. The stories range from disturbing to outright surreal, with Ito's trademark body horror and bizarre imagery on full display. The main effect the twins have on people is dissolving their bodies, most notably their brains, but there is one chapter where they basically make a girl become hideously ugly and deformed. It's kind of vague as to what exactly is going on, other than the brother seems to have made a deal with a demon. Prison Lab. Prison Lab is pretty gnarly. It follows a high school student who is bullied mercilessly every day. This bullying is orchestrated by one individual and the head bully, Aya, who thinks of Ayama as nothing but useless trash. Well, the tables turn when Ayama is offered to participate in a game. He can choose one person to be a hostage and keep them confined to a room for a month doing whatever he wants with them. Ayama uses this as his chance for revenge on his bully and enters Aya's name. There are other prisoners and captors who are part of the game as well. The captors, including Ayama, inflict horrible torture on their victims, with the only rule of the game being that you can't kill your hostage. Some of the horror besides the torture is how Ayama goes from the victim to the criminal so quickly, and worse than that, he becomes more and more sadistic as the days pass, determined to break the spirit of Aya. Doubt. Doubt is a manga series that revolves around a fictional cell phone game called Rabbit Doubt. In the game, the players are rabbits in a colony, and one of them is randomly chosen to act as a wolf infiltrating the group. Each round, the rabbits guess which one is the wolf, as the rabbits are eaten one by one until only the wolf is left. Yeah, so it's basically Among Us. In the story, 4 players of the game are knocked unconscious and awaken in an abandoned psychiatric hospital where they discover that they are playing a real-life game of Rabbit Doubt. To survive, the wolf, described as the liar, must die. The story progresses as the group tries to find the wolf and exit while they are brutally being killed off. The author actually has 2 other mangas that are sort of spiritual successors to Doubt called Judge and Secret, so I'd recommend reading all 3. Jinrao Game. Similar to Doubt, Jinrao Game, or Werewolf Game, has a group of people forced into a deadly game. 2 of the participants are the wolves, while the rest are villagers who must vote on who they think the wolves are. You can't opt out of the game or you'll be killed, and the consequence of a villager being voted out is death, on top of the other brutal ways you could die by the wolves themselves, so things get very intense very quickly. Pupa. Okay, this is easily the most disturbing on this tier. Pupa follows a pair of siblings, Utsutsu and Yume, who are heavily abused by their father as kids. One day they run into a mysterious woman who looks like a witch, and she warns them to leave before they see the red butterflies. Later, Yume sees red butterflies, and a cute little puppy comes out when it transforms into a grotesque monster. Shortly after, Yume becomes a monster as well and lays waste to every nearby human. Her brother, Utsutsu, tries to comfort her only to be eaten by her. Well, it turns out that Yume has contracted a virus called Pupa that transforms the infected into monsters who must eat flesh to survive. Her brother actually survived the attack because he was infected as well, but to a lesser degree, gaining regenerative abilities similar to that of Deadpool or Wolverine. Now, here's where it gets really weird. Because Yume must feed on flesh, Utsutsu allows her to eat him since he can regenerate, and it's just so weird, man. It just makes me feel all icky. Obviously, it's more complicated than just that. There's a secret organization keeping tabs on them and all that, but the sibling cannibal scenes are just, ugh. Tier 4. Lullabies from Hell. Lullabies from Hell is a horror manga by Hideshi Hino, who is known for body horror, this manga being no exception. It contains 4 horror stories. The first is a fictional biography of the author himself describing his childhood. In the story, his head is misshapen and he has an obsession with the grotesque, mutilating animals and often dreaming he's a ruler of demons in hell who commands them to attack and torture people. It's pretty sick stuff. Eventually he grows up to become a manga artist and realizes he has the ability to kill people just by willing it so. The story ends with the author talking directly to the reader and wishing them dead. Man, that's pretty hardcore. The second story is about a couple who end up having a strange lizard-like baby that eventually thirsts for human blood. The third story is about a group of kids who take a train through a tunnel that seems to be filled with ghosts that later begin to stalk them. The final story is about a deformed man who's shunned by his village only to become more and more deformed and covered in boils. What can I say? Hideshi Hino just has his own style of drawing and horror that really stands out. If any of this sounds familiar, it might be because there have been several live-action adaptations of some of his stories, most notably in Hideshi Hino's Theater of Horror, which I actually covered way back in the J-Horror Iceberg. Anna Sashuin. Also known as Peephole, this is about a man who, after failing to hang himself, accidentally puts a small hole through the wall where he can see into his neighbor's apartment. His neighbor is beautiful and also happens to be a killer. She lures men back to her apartment where she slices them up with a box knife. The peeping Tom witnesses the whole thing. Eventually, she finds him looking through the hole and they form a kind of messed up relationship. She keeps killing and even begins murdering people randomly outside. But the dude is helplessly in love with her and he's afraid she'll kill him too, so it's a lot. Crime Zone. Crime Zone takes place in a world where vampires are real and known about, although there hasn't been an attack in years. Shiro, a typical high school kid, decides to go out past dusk with a group of friends even though the adults have warned them not to. Turns out one of his classmates is a vampire and she absolutely devastates the group of kids, apart from Shiro. Lucky for Shiro, another classmate, Erika, seems to have powers of her own and makes quick work of the vampire. Erika has the ability to transform her arms into weapons, one of which is a beast-like mouth that straight up just chomps vampires. It's pretty brutal and pretty cool. Gaju. Gaju is about a group of people in a subway train that get attacked by a giant bear-like creature in armor that just starts eating everybody. That's literally the whole thing. It's just non-stop terror as these people run from the beast and try to escape or kill it. Kind of reminds me of Jaws or Cujo or something like that, where there's just one singular beast that's on a rampage. Drifting Classroom. Drifting Classroom follows 6th grader Sho Takamatsu, who gets into an argument with his mother before heading to school. Suddenly a tremor occurs and Sho's school is transported to a post-apocalyptic wasteland where they realize they've traveled through time. The adults descend into madness, and some students resort to delinquency, hoarding food and water, causing dissension, and spreading a deadly plague. However, Sho and his group of survivors band together to lead the children as a quasi-government. Nishi, a telepathic student, helps them communicate with Sho's mother in the past, who prepares objects to aid them in the future. In their fight for survival, they face many threats, including hostile megafauna, food and water shortages, and madness. Portus. Portus is about 2 high school students who stumble upon a mysterious video game that transports them to a nightmarish world where they're hunted by grotesque creatures. If you want to check this one out, it's a fairly quick read because there's only 1 volume. Mashira. Mashira is about a small village nestled in the mountains where a group of people must fight for their lives against the tribe of giant apes that have been attacking the village for generations. Jin, who survived an attack by these beasts as a child, now returns as an adult and trains to become a skilled fighter, joining the battle against the apes. It's a pretty far out concept, and there are some pretty bizarre twists along the way, not to mention the copious amounts of blood and gore the apes inflict on people. Monkey Peak. Monkey Peak is actually very similar to Mashira in that it's based around a group of people who are trapped in the mountains after a bus accident who are attacked by a group of apes. The apes look a lot different in this manga, almost more tribal and demonic looking, as well as their ability to use tools and weapons. Eden no Ori. Eden no Ori, or Cage of Eden, is another survival horror manga. This time it's a group of students who are trapped on an island after a plane crash. The island is full of large, prehistoric style beasts that brutally begin killing off the humans. It reminds me of Skull Island or something, but anime style. The Friends Eater Classroom. Yeah, this is a weird one. Basically, a bunch of high school students are forced to participate in a game. The game is called Tomagui, which means gluttony in Japanese, and it involves a group of students drawing lots to determine which one of them will become the eater and which will become the eaten. The eater then has to hunt down and kill the eaten before they're allowed to escape the school grounds. It's pretty messed up. Killing Morph. Killing Morph starts off with a bang. Madoka and her friends walk down a crowded street when suddenly a masked killer shows up and just lays waste to everyone in his path. Before killing Madoka, he's apprehended by the police, but Madoka begins seeing the killer everywhere. She's convinced these are just hallucinations. That is until more murders begin to happen. Basically, the killer, who is called M, has the ability of bilocation, meaning he can actually be in two places at once. So while he sits in his jail cell, he also continues ruthlessly killing his victims elsewhere. It's a really cool idea, and I like the look of M, who seems like an amalgamation of several different 80s slasher villains. This one definitely has its twists and turns as Madoka faces off against M. The manga definitely grapples with the mind of serial killers, and every chapter actually ends with a quote from a real-life killer. Pretty dark stuff. Higanjima. Higanjima is another vampire manga. The story follows Akira Miyamoto, a teenage boy who travels to a remote island called Higanjima to search for his missing older brother. However, upon arriving on the island, Akira and his friends discover that Higanjima is inhabited by vampires and other supernatural creatures. The group quickly realizes that they must fight for their survival as they are relentlessly hunted by the island's inhabitants. Shibuya Kingo. This manga is literally about thousands of giant flying goldfish infesting a city and eating every human they come across. It's really weird. In the last video I covered Junji Ito's manga simply called Gyo, where sea creatures crawl out of the ocean on mechanical legs. Well, this is kind of like that, except it's more cartoonish and somehow more bizarre. I don't know what to say about this one. It's wacky, man. The Island of Giant Insects. The Island of Giant Insects is exactly what the title would suggest. It follows a group of high school students and their homeroom teacher who are stranded on an uninhabited island after their plane crashes. However, they soon discover that the island is inhabited by giant mutated insects that are highly aggressive and deadly. And I mean deadly, like ripping people apart and draining them of blood kind of deadly. The students must band together and use their wits to survive as they face numerous challenges and life-threatening situations. Along the way, they uncover secrets about the island and the bizarre experiments that led to the creation of the giant insects. 14. Okay, this is one of the most bizarre ones on the list, so let me just run through this. In the 22nd century, a weird Birdman hybrid named Chicken George pops up at a chicken factory where he learns everything about humanity and realizes that we're all screwed because some prophecy says the world will end when all the kids born that year turn 14. So Chicken George decides he's going to build a rocket to save all the animals and maybe some humans, but then he falls for some girl named Barbara and decides to stay on Earth instead. But then aliens show up and start raping humans to share their DNA, which, isn't cool. So the aliens eventually realize there's no hope for human DNA and start instead stealing spiritual energy from Earth, which throws the whole planet out of balance, causing natural disasters and a massive decrease in population. And it just gets even more wacky from there. It's one of the most what the fuck mangas I've seen since researching this iceberg. But I gotta say, Chicken George is pretty awesome. Hellstar Remina. Love to see some cosmic horror on this list, and from none other than Junji Ito. Hellstar Remina follows the discovery of a new planet named Remina that suddenly appears in the sky and is named after a young girl. The discovery brings fame and fortune to her father, a scientist who discovered the planet, and to Remina herself, who becomes a media sensation. However, things take a dark turn when it's revealed that Remina is not a planet, but a living organism that begins to devour other planets and stars, causing widespread destruction and panic. As the creature draws closer to Earth, people start to blame Remina herself for bringing the monster to their planet. The story follows Remina and her father as they try to survive in a world turned upside down by the appearance of the monstrous creature. They're chased by a crazed cult, a doomsday prepper, and even the military, who see Remina as the only way to stop the monster. Private Punishment Game. Private Punishment Game is one of the most brutal on this tier. Essentially, a group of students wake up in an unknown facility and are forced to participate in a series of messed up games that result in severe bodily harm or death. The games are put on by a mysterious figure in a demented bunny mask who explains the rules for each game. If you haven't noticed, it seems pretty heavily inspired by Saw. This one starts off bleak and only gets bleaker, with the students slowly being killed off in horrible ways. Just so you get an idea, one game has 2 students trapped in glass boxes, each with blades above them that are slowly lowering. The only way to survive is by pulling a lever that causes the other player's blades to lower faster. But if you pull the lever, acid sprays on you, so there's no easy way out of any of these. It's a pretty short read, and if you enjoy Saw, you'll probably get a kick out of it. Although, like I said, it's pretty heavy and definitely made me wince a few times. Kurata Sagashi. Asuka is a typical high school girl minding her own business when suddenly the ghost of a dead girl appears and asks her to look for her body. Yeah, that's how this one starts. So basically, Asuka and a group of fellow students are stuck in a time loop where they have one day to find all of the dead girl's body parts hidden throughout the school. If they fail, then a figure simply called the Red Person appears and slaughters one of them before the time loop starts back over at the start of the day. It's a really cool premise and even got a live action adaptation. Libidors. Okay, well, this is a manga where a mysterious illness turns people into monsters when they're sexually aroused. So, Isamu is of course a horny high school student who learns to harness his horniness in order to turn his rock-hard arm into a Hellboy-style big boy. Well, that's a sentence I never thought I'd utter. Anyway, it's obviously insane, but it is pretty comical, and I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some epic moments of Isamu fighting these mutated sex fiends off with his giant arm. It's worth a peek if you want a good laugh, but it's also pretty graphic and disturbing at some points. Okay, another one bites the dust. I'm really excited and a little nervous to get into the next few tiers. Shout out to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, and Krusty the Krab. You guys are awesome. If you want to get a shout out like that at the end of every video, along with a bunch of other bonus content, you can check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. But as always, I'm glad you guys are watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.